We've all seen this person. Maybe it was a friend, a colleague, someone you follow online. We've watched them skip dinners, cancel plans, burn through savings they probably shouldn't have touched. We've all seen the moment when it got close, really close, when the money was almost gone, when the team was asking questions they couldn't fully answer, when the whole thing was days away from becoming nothing. And we've watched them keep going anyway. So the question isn't whether this person exists. We've all seen them. The question is why?
Lock me up in the maze. Turn out the lights.
When people think about founders, they usually think in extremes. The billionaire, the celebrity, the scandal. Or the collapse stories. Theranos, WeWork, warnings wrapped in ambition. And from that, a simplified image emerged. Egotistical, obsessed, status-driven, detached from reality. But that explanation falls apart quickly when you look at what founders actually do to themselves. Because building a company is not rational in the traditional sense. Most startups fail. Most founders spend years under pressure that they cannot fully explain to outsiders. They sacrifice stability, relationships, sleep, certainty, sometimes even health, for something that might never work. And yet, some people still feel pulled towards it. Not because they love risk, but because stability feels strangely incomplete. Some people experience routine as peace. Others experience it as friction. And that difference changes everything. A certain type of person struggles inside predefined roles, not because they reject work, but because they react strongly to imposed limits, especially ones that feel arbitrary. They hear, "This is just how things are done here." And something in them resists that sentence, because they don't just see tasks, they see systems, not just outputs, but patterns. And once they notice inefficiency, they don't easily unsee it. A broken workflow isn't just annoying, it becomes mentally active, unfinished. And this is one of the recurring traits, heightened sensitivity to possibility. There's another layer to this. Founders develop a strange relationship with uncertainty itself. We've all watched it from the outside. A week where everything is collapsing. Users leaving, investors hesitating, a key hire backing out. And then something small shifts. A user signs up, a metric moves, a feature suddenly clicks. And the entire emotional state resets. Not because the problem is solved, but because something is moving again. And that's not just motivation, that's reinforcement. The brain reacts strongly to variable reward, not consistent reward. Which means entrepreneurship quietly becomes a loop. Uncertainty, then action, then small signal, then renewed energy, and then more uncertainty. Not pleasure, momentum. And over time, some people become dependent on that motion. A stable day can feel strangely flat, not peaceful, just silent. And there's no single origin story, but patterns show up. A surprising number of founders grew up feeling slightly disconnected from the default path. Not necessarily traumatized, just different enough to question things early. Some grew up in unstable environments and became highly adaptable. Some were rewarded heavily for competence and achievement. Some learned independence early. Some felt misunderstood. Some discovered that creating things gave them a sense of control that they couldn't find elsewhere. And many developed a quiet belief. If I want something to exist, I'll probably have to build it myself. And that belief becomes a lens, and not everyone develops it. But once it's there, it doesn't easily disappear. Not all founders are driven by the same force, but certain patterns repeat. The rebel, the person who resists meaningless structure. They don't reject order. They reject order that doesn't make sense. We've all seen this founder, the one who lasted 8 months at a corporate job before something snapped. Not out of laziness, out of an inability to follow rules that had no real explanation. Eventually, they stopped asking for permission entirely. The optimizer, the person who sees inefficiency everywhere. They don't experience systems as fixed. They experience them as improvable. They walk into a restaurant and quietly redesign the ordering process in their head. They use a product once and immediately understand 3 ways it should work differently. A product is never finished, it's just temporarily accepted. The builder, the person who simply needs to create. Not for status, not for validation, but because creation itself feels like resolution. We've all seen them disappear for 3 weeks and resurface with something that didn't exist before. Not for applause, because the building itself was the point. The idealist. Some founders are driven by something different. Not rebellion, not optimization, not identity. Meaning. They see something in the world that feels broken or incomplete, and they become emotionally unable to ignore it. Sometimes it's an experience that should never be as painful as it is. Sometimes it's a system that fails the same people over and over for no good reason. These founders often believe that technology or a better designed company can meaningfully change people's lives. And whether they are right or wrong, that belief gives them unusual endurance. Because when the startup struggles, it doesn't just feel like a business failing. It feels like progress failing. The prover. This founder is shaped by doubt, real or perceived. The moment someone says, that won't work, something locks in. Not pure ego, validation. They need to know that their instinct was correct. The company becomes a test, not just of the idea, but of themselves. And over time, the need to prove becomes indistinguishable from the work. Because once doubt enters the picture, the startup stops being just a company. It becomes identity. The escapist. Some founders are not moving towards ambition. They are moving away from stillness. Building creates structure for restlessness. Progress replaces discomfort with direction. Achievement becomes anesthesia. From the outside, it looks like drive. From the inside, it can feel like escape. The strangest thing about founders is that many of them know the odds. They've read the statistics. They've watched other companies fail. They've seen what stress does to people. And they still do it anyway. Because founders operate on a dangerous but powerful belief that reality is more flexible than most people think, that systems can be rewritten, that industries can change, that the future is negotiable. Most people see the world and adapt to it. Founders look at the world and instinctively ask, what if this was different? And that question can become impossible to ignore. One of the hardest things about working with a founder is that they are often responding to information that others cannot see. From the outside, the roadmap changes, priorities shift, decisions feel inconsistent, but internally, the signals are different. Runway is shorter than expected. A competitor just changed the landscape. User behavior shifted quietly. A funding conversation failed in a single sentence. To employees, it feels like instability. To founders, it feels like survival math. And that creates one of the biggest tensions inside startups. Employees are trained to execute stability, and founders are forced to navigate uncertainty. That's why the people inside startups eventually learn a different skill, not just executing tasks, but understanding context. They don't just ask, what was I assigned? They ask, what is the company trying to survive right now? Because in startups, adaptability is often more valuable than perfection. A founder surrounded only by agreement eventually loses clarity. Speed without resistance turns into drift. The most valuable people in startups are not passive executors. They are stabilizers. They know when to move quickly and when to slow things down, not by blocking ideas, but by refining them. Here are the trade-offs. Here are the 2 alternatives worth considering. And here's the one I'd recommend. That kind of thinking doesn't reduce momentum. It protects it. Because founders spend their lives carrying uncertainty. Everyone brings them problems. Very few people reduce complexity. And even fewer are willing to intelligently say no. Not emotionally, not politically, but strategically. But founders have blind spots too, sometimes dangerous ones as well. One of the biggest ones is independence. Many become founders because they trust their own judgment more than systems or managers. And this works early. In the beginning, doing everything yourself feels sufficient. The founder writes the copy, builds the prototype, talks to customers, fixes bugs at midnight, until the system grows. And suddenly, the thing that made them effective becomes the thing slowing everyone down. We've all seen this version of a founder too. The one who is technically still running everything, but is now the reason nothing moves fast enough. Not because they stopped caring, because they never learned to let go. Delegation feels slower, teaching feels inefficient, and letting go feels risky. So they keep doing until they become the bottleneck. And meanwhile, something quieter happens inside the team. People stop feeling connected to the direction. Not because they disagree, but because it's no longer clearly communicated. A startup is not just execution, it's shared belief. And without that, even good teams drift. The same psychology that helps someone build a company can also make it hard to ever feel finished. Because once your mind learns to chase possibility, stillness feels incomplete. One milestone becomes the next baseline. One success becomes normal. One problem becomes a new focus. We've seen this founder too. The one who sold the company, who took 6 months off and then couldn't sleep because they were already building the next thing in their head. Not because they needed the money, but because stopping felt unnatural, which is why some founders never really arrive anywhere. Psychologically, they keep moving, searching for the next problem, the next obsession, the next vision, trying to satisfy something that was never entirely about money in the first place. So why does someone become a founder? There isn't one answer. Some are building, some are proving, some are escaping, some are trying to fix something they can't ignore, and some are trying to create something that feels meaningful. Most are a combination of all of these, often without knowing which one is dominant, because the drive usually comes before the explanation. They didn't choose it after careful reasoning. They chose it because not doing it felt worse. And whether it leads to something remarkable or something costly, it usually starts the same way. A person looking at the world as it is and quietly refusing to accept it as final. Right, Bichito? Yes. High five. Thanks a lot and have a great day.